Today I'm going to show you how to bypass the cooling feed lines going to the transmission heat exchanger. It's a good idea to do if you're not in extreme cold temperatures. That heat exchanger has a problem, failure, where it internally fails, starts pumping coolant into your transmission fluid, and then the transmission's toast. So put a new trans in. I'm not even going to think about it. With my new monitor, I've been able to watch transmission temperatures and realized that, with that thing pumping engine temperature coolant to the transmission fluid, you're never going to really get that transmission cooler than operating temp. If you're still running the stock thermostat, that's 195. I've gone with the 180 stat, and it still just mimics, whatever the coolant temp is. You're not going to really get your transmission below that. I don't like temperature. I don't think that it's really necessary for most people out there with these trucks. They did away with it in 08. So getting it bypassed, at least the cooling system, is going to be a good idea. That's what this video is going to be. I'm also going to do a couple tests where I'm going to hook my boat up to the truck. It's about 90 degrees, 92 or 3. Hot summer day. I'm going to take it for a good half an hour drive. There's 35-mile-an-hour stop signs, 45-mile-an-hour twisty mountain roads out here, and then a pretty good little jaunt of 4-lane highway that's 55 mile an hour. So the monitor does record highs. I'm going to check coolant temperatures and then also transmission temperatures for maximums, just to see how it reacts. I've been driving it for a couple weeks now with that new turbo and tuning on it, so I got kind of an idea what to expect. I'm just going to be really interested to see if the coolant actually stays a little cooler, since you're not pushing hot transmission fluid into the coolant side. And I can't imagine getting rid of the coolant heating up the transmission fluid. So I think that just bypassing this is going to be a win for both engine coolant temperatures and transmission temperatures. It should be pretty straightforward. There's a couple fittings. I'm going to show everything in detail, how to take it apart, what pieces it was. I'm going to measure everything up so you know what size hose to get. Should be, I would say, maybe an hour project, something like that. That doesn't look too awful difficult. So let me get this thing all hooked up, take a good test drive, let it cool down, and then it's going to be tear it apart time. So that was after about a 30-minute drive. Maximum trans temp 221, a little higher than I was expecting. Max coolant's around 203. It's showing temp-wise about 92 degrees. I'll see what the weather channel says, but yeah, I usually see the trans temp mimic engine coolant temp. Makes sense with that exchanger still hooked up. So I'm really hopeful to see how this is going to work out. One thing I would like to note, the light toe tune. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I've climbed some pretty decent grades, converter locked, 60 mile an hour, not letting out of it. Max boost pressure was only 22 pounds, so I wasn't beating on it, but just taking the family to the lake or whatever. It's kind of how I was driving, not aggressive by any means, but kind of impressed that it stayed under 1200 degrees exhaust. So originally what got me thinking about this was this metal line for your heater core. As you can see, like all of them do, there's some rust accumulating on it. When I was doing the turbo swap the other week, I was actually going to replace that metal pipe with a stock pipe. I'm really glad I didn't. Those things, the metal tube that runs underneath the manifold's like $150 or something like that. And it's also branched off and runs around the back side of the block to the heat exchanger over there. So what I'm going to do is go right below your alternator. Might be a little difficult to see, but this is the feed to the metal piping system that runs up underneath the manifold there, and ultimately wires around back there. I'm going to just go ahead and bypass this metal hose completely. It's pretty easy on this side. There is a 90-degree fitting. You can tell that this metal tube at the beginning here is definitely larger than the 5/8 that is at the heater core itself. They weren't nice enough to actually even put the heater hose size on there. So I'm gonna start with just draining the coolant. There's one thing to watch out for on these radiators. The drain plug on the radiator itself, a lot of the times they like to leak after you open them up. So I'm gonna kind of go rogue style on this one and just pull my hose here to drain most of the block. And once I get this thing draining, I'll show you what's entailed on the other side. All right, so I'll try to show one of the funner parts of the job, I should say. The metal tube that I mentioned earlier that connects from your fitting behind the lower radiator hose runs like this. It's easy to get to. There's one 10mm, it secures it. Hose tool, if you don't have something like this for spring clamps, these are Blue Points. I'm pretty sure Lyle makes a pair of these as well. These are a lifesaver. Way better than a pair of pliers on these spring clamps. But tube comes out super easy. I'm getting rid of a bunch of different silicone connectors. That makes me happy. I did fight with the elbow itself for a while. The actual fitting is 1 1/8 inches. And I ended up having to take the alternator off, obviously. And I also took the alternator top mount off. And I was able to get this wrench in underneath these cables and have just enough room to get it to pop loose. It is Loctited into the housing, so it is very tight. It feels like you're gonna break the thing off. So you're gonna definitely need this or a big crescent wrench. Once I got it broke loose, you get it pivoted like this and you can't get anything else on it. I wanted to show you one trick that I did with 2 crescent wrenches that made this possible. But basically what you want to do is get your 1 crescent wrench on it sideways like such, and then take your other crescent, tighten it down, and you can put it on your first crescent wrench, and that gives you enough room to get it to start moving and turning. And that's how I got it. Once you pull about a full turn out, you can get it by finger from there. And I'm sure that you probably guess where we're going with this now. We're just going to end up adapting this down to a 5/8 hose that I will show you here shortly. Took just a couple minutes to get that, I'm going to call it the middle pipe, whatever you want to say, the one that runs actually behind the manifold that connects to that little elbow that goes around the back of the block and also connects to the bottom heater core hose fitting. It came out with the turbo on, obviously. There's just one 15mm nut right up above that turbo stud, and it comes out. I left the silicones actually on it. I'll show you kind of what I've got going on here so far. Oh, that was zoomed. Obviously our fitting. First piece, left these on, left that one on. I did remove the heater core end just to kind of show you, but you can kind of finagle it out the top. Yeah, I'm really really happy I decided to go ahead and replace this pipe, even though this is primarily a Southern truck and doesn't have very much rust, if any at all. It's just terrible. That's definitely going to be leaking sooner or later. And while we're talking about the amount of road debris that splashes up, get yourself a little piece of rubber off of Amazon. You can get it by the sheet. I made myself a nice little fill panel to try to keep everything, road dust, dirt, mud, water, all that kind of stuff. It's just an open hole that just points directly at your turbo. You probably can't see a whole lot from what I did, but pretty simple. Some 1/4 inch rubber mat that I made a template out of, some chipboard. But that's kind of my plan, to keep water from spraying up and possibly cracking that exhaust housing if it's hot. So far so good. I'm going to start attacking the heat exchanger fittings here next. Since we're on the topic of my obsession with trying to make this thing run as cool as possible, I did take the air horn off. I am going to take this boost tube out. I'm going to try to do all of this mostly from the top if possible. You can see the exchanger in the back. I might not be able to get most of it from the top up here, but I hate working on my back, so we're gonna try that. But pulling the air horn off, if you do this, you're obviously gonna need new gaskets. So I went ahead and opted for not only the new gaskets, but an intake elbow. There are countless companies making cast aluminum elbows that range, you know, $350, $400 for just the elbow, that kind of stuff. Tons of different heater grid block offs. Again, about $100, somewhere in there, 80, 90, $100 for one of their block offs. This is CX Racing. I've used them for some headers and stuff in the past. This was about 65 bucks. And I'm actually fairly impressed. The welds look nice. The finish looks nice. It's got a place for the dipstick still. If you look, this is all mandrel, of course. Nice open airway. And then you look at the stock, that got to be a restriction. So I think that'll be a nice little upgrade. About 90 bucks, I think. This was 25 shipped, and this was like 65. So I don't know how much you're gaining by getting rid of the heater grid. If you are cold climate, obviously keep this piece, but it's got to help disperse the air into the cylinder, into the manifold easier without having those fins, I guess. But just wanted to show you real quick kind of the difference. I'll throw a link to these pieces as well. Not a must-do upgrade, but why not while you're here kind of situation. Just want to take a second and kind of go over what's been going on with the project. Like I said, I've got all these pieces out. If you wanted to stop at this point and do just the cooling system side of it, delete, you can. You can leave the other piece of the hose that goes around the back of the block. It's not going to do anything. It's going to be an empty tube. Transmission fluid will go through it. That's it. Pretty much all you're going to need is about 35 bucks worth of fittings for the fluid side of things. This is going to go into the block, this auto meter. It is a metric sealed fitting. There are some cheap knockoffs that are aluminum and whatever on Amazon. I opted to spend the extra couple bucks and get the brass. I like screwing brass into cast iron instead of aluminum, whatever. This will take just an 1/8 inch pipe plug and on the end of it as well. I ordered a little kit for $7 or whatever, so I wanted to stick brass, obviously. But yeah, this thing was $17.50, something like that. And then again, the 5/8 hose barb to 3/4 national pipe. I think that was 15 bucks. So 35 bucks in fittings, and then a couple feet of 5/8 heater hose. You can get that O'Reilly's, whatever. I think they're like $3 a foot, something like that. That will take care of the coolant side, and at least you'd have it bypassed, or you wouldn't have to worry about coolant going into the transmission. So the next part of the cooling system block off is that metric fitting that I mentioned earlier. And if you can see right in between the fuel bowl where that red lock tab on the electrical connector is, let me change it a little bit, maybe I can get this thing down in there. There is a 90-degree elbow with a coolant hose attached to it right there. And that is going to be the last part to completely block this off. You can see the spring clamp with that 90 degrees sitting on it. Once you remove that metal tube that runs back to the heat exchanger itself, that fitting will just unscrew from the block, and then we'll replace it with that auto meter piece. So it's going to be kind of hard to do anything, show you what's going on wise, since it's so tight. But give me a few minutes here and I should be able to get it off fairly easy, actually, it looks like. And a long extension and a 7/8 deep socket. Gets right onto that original fitting. Gives you plenty of room to crank her out there. If you go right between those two lines, straight shot. So keep that in mind, 7/8 is what you're gonna need there. I think it's about a 8-inch extension, get you clear of the water separator. All right, you can see the original nippled piece. This is a metric, I can't remember, I think it's like a M14 or something like that. The 2268 auto meter is a direct replacement for the thread pitch and everything. It's actually got, I like, a copper washer instead of just an O-ring. But so far pretty easy. All right, got the heater core side all taken care of. Teflon tape. I don't like the paste. I've been burned too many times with that stuff not sealing. Just good Teflon tape. I used 44 inches of the 5/8 hose and actually just met my AC line. Zip tied it to the low side fitting and then just ran it straight up to the heater core. No extra 90s or 45s or anything needed. I'm probably gonna stick one more tie right around this AC line and it's completely out of the way of heat and everything from the turbo. So get yourself 4 feet, trim as you want, route as you want, but that's definitely out of harm's way. If the AC line's lived there for 20 years, that heater hose should be just fine. All right, boat's finally hooked up, cooling system's bled. One thing I wanted to mention, while filling your cooling system, take your heater core hose loose there. It makes a huge air pocket after you drain the block. So just pulling that hose up, then you just fill the radiator, bleeds out 90% of the air. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this thing for a run, same route. It is matching 92 degrees outside. So we should have a real good A to B comparison here shortly. So I'm pretty much done with my test drive loop. Maximum I've seen is about 204. That's a pretty big difference. The one thing that I wanted to kind of show, see if I can make it happen for you quick, is once you do get back up to speed with this, being bypassed, it'll actually start to cool itself. And that's something where it didn't do that before. So I'm about 50 mile an hour converter locked. And you'll start to probably notice it dropping again. I've saw that a couple different times, especially when you get out. Oh, that's nice. Sure can pull out right in front of me. That should help. Now the project's done, test drives are done. Saw pretty darn close to a 15, 17 degree drop in temperatures on that same route. Both were at 92 to 93 degrees ambient temp. The 206, 207 that I saw maximum after doing the route with the coolant bypassed, that works great. I was pretty impressed. You know, even a 10 degree drop at that temperature is pretty good in my opinion. The biggest thing that I did notice is the ability for the transmission fluid to cool once you get rolling again. That's something that I didn't really notice a whole lot. It seemed like once you went past the coolant temp threshold, it just kind of hung there and never really wanted to drop back down. You would think that the coolant, even though it is 190 degrees or whatever, would kind of offset the transmission fluid temperature and help lower it, but that's not what I've seen as the case anyways. So what I ended up doing was I did my route, showed you the clip of the maximums and everything. I ended up kind of going past the house and I went to a neighborhood and climbed a bunch of hills. This is like a very hilly, up and down, low speed, stop signs. I ran loops, I don't know, a handful of times, got it to about 230 degrees. I mean, I don't think I went over 20, 25 mile an hour. So the one thing I wanted to test was I heard some people concerned about bypassing the cooling system because just what I mentioned earlier, the thought was that the transmission fluid could get hot in town situations, whatever, and the engine coolant should help offset that scenario. I found that to be not really valid at all. Just unhooking the boat, backing it in the trailer, you know, whatever, put my hitch away and stuff. I let the truck just sit and idle for a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes total, and it dropped about 15, 16 degrees transmission coolant temp wise, just sitting there idling. So if you are stuck in traffic or in town or whatever, yes, the upshifts and the accelerating is gonna add temperature, shifts add temperature. But when you actually sit at a stoplight, you'll see that temperature start to drop because your cooling fan's still pulling air through the transcooler. I don't see a negative side to this at all. If you're not living in Alaska or Antarctica, I don't see how it'd be a negative. I know that too much temperature on transmission fluid is a bad thing. I've never really heard a solid argument for not at least, normal temperature fluid hurting something. And if you're talking 10 below zero, yeah, fluids don't like to flow at that kind of temperature. But just the normal everyday 80 degree, 100 degree fluid temp, I don't see how that would work. I've got some experience in drag racing and things like that, and you don't ever really worry about trying to warm up your transmission. You're trying to keep the transmission cool. So I don't see a lot of valid point for the argument to keep the heat exchanger intact for that reason. Combine that with, like I said, when it's the 6.7s, they just got rid of that heat exchanger altogether. So they must have figured out that it's not really a worthwhile piece, and it's kind of a problematic thing that you could really lose a lot of money on if it did fail. So one less thing to worry about. This was just the coolant bypass side itself. Like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, the up to 06 or 07, they ran hard lines, which is a different instruction set on how to bypass the hard lines at the actual heat exchanger itself. I might go ahead and do that. I'm not real sure. I might do a video, see if there's any kind of gain by removing that piece. I think the only thing that's in there is an anti-drain back valve. I do want to talk to ATS on that a little bit. I know the sales rep had same year truck as I did. He said he bypassed it completely. See if there's any benefit to having that anti-drain back valve on the pressure side. Maybe helps with startups, I'm not sure. So I'm gonna research that a little bit more. But as far as this video goes, that's a wrap. I highly recommend it. It is gonna help cool everything down, especially when you hit any kind of speed, 45 mile an hour on up. All you see is just the temperatures dropping. And the more you're just cruising, not shifting a ton, it just keeps dropping. You can get it below engine coolant temp finally. And I think that's going to help just keep the longevity of a transmission together. So thanks for watching, and I hope this helps out. Hope a couple pieces save a bunch of money for some of you guys out there instead of buying the $180 line kit that companies offer. And if you like the video, please hit thank you, like, and subscribe. Take care.